Like you asked, that how many genders there are, we don't need to define that. There can be an infinite number of genders. It's all about what you define. I could go around wearing a dress if that's what I particularly wanted to do.
But are you still a boy then? Because you have a penis, I would assume.
Time for the latest installment of Change My Mind, where we rationalize our positions on controversial topics. This week is our second installment of the Student Edition series, revisiting the topic of there only being two genders. Now, of course, the idea that there are more than two genders seems to be a hot topic these days.
I think it's disrespectful to force somebody to use pronouns
that are
being invented by the day.
If I told they're not being invented by the day, I don't know where you're getting that information.
How many genders are there? How many pronouns are there?
I can't define the number of genders or the number of pronouns.
Exactly,
I'm sorry,
because anyone can determine them. They are being invented by the day.
People, we have to listen to the science. And the science says we're all on a spectrum.
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am.
As always, sound off below your thoughts on the topic, what topics you'd like to see most in the future, and in this case, how you think the students presented their arguments. Now, it should be noted that, as in the last episode, the UT Dean of Student Activities forbid us from having two students behind the desk at one time, hence the awkward workaround. Time to meet the first two students, Sam and Parker.
So I want to make sure that we understand kind of the general and I know, sorry, there's a lot of people, so you might not all be able to hear right now. Sam is on the change my mind side of the fence here, so you know it's your position, your job to state your position in the affirmative and allow someone else to try and convince you otherwise. So it's kind of a little bit of an attack and defend ideas, right? Yeah. Sam believes there are two genders, and sorry, what was your name again?
Parker.
Parker believes that there are more than two genders. So Sam, you know how to set this up.
Yep.
Invite him to...
Hi, Parker.
Hi, Sam.
Hey, so I believe that there are only two genders, and I'd be willing to have you try to change my mind.
Okay. Parker.
I believe that there are more than two.
Okay.
And I'd be willing to change his mind. I think I can. I believe in myself.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we supposed to start?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm already behind a rope. I feel like I've lost.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say the are not. It's like arguing something's existence. It's like arguing the existence of God. So I feel like gender expression is kind of a different thing, where people can find their own communities of people who feel similarly, who feel uncomfortable in their own skin, and it provides them an opportunity to blossom socially that otherwise they might not have if they were lying about their identity or if they continue to be uncomfortable in their own skin.
Sure. Okay. So I'm a believer that there's a difference between how you feel and what you actually are made up of, right? So I could pretend I'm a unicorn and go to a unicorns meeting, and feel like that's including me in a society, but that doesn't mean I'm a unicorn, right? Obviously.
Those people are called furries. They exist. And they're very happy with their communities.
So based on science and biology and science, are those people unicorns though?
No, they're not. But I mean, you can't. That's something that can never change. It's about your brain chemistry and about the way that you're made up. The identity is a way of circumventing that. Like if you feel like you were born wrong, the opposing view would be that's just how it is, and you're kind of stuck. But this new school of thought allows people to be much more comfortable with who they are and not have it be tethered to something that they can't change.
So, I guess what I'd say to that is, I think there's so can you give me the difference between just feeling like you're something versus actually being it? What makes me, if I feel like I'm a woman, what makes me actually be a woman versus just saying, hey, I'm a woman?
Well, that's the debate, and I don't think conflating biology with that. There's a difference between brain chemistry and biology. Like if you're born biologically male, your brain chemistry you might have more estrogen than the average male, maybe, and you might lean towards one side a little bit more. And that can result.
But genetically, are you still a man?
Well, I mean, genetically, we only exist in two forms. But I feel like ostracizing the argument to, of course, there are men and women, but we've created more schools of thought, more ways for people to express themselves physically.
Okay, so if we're creating them, that means that they're not natural, correct?
Not natural.
If they're man-made, that means they're not natural, right?
That whole not natural thing brings up.
Don't look to me. This is between you two right now.
I know, but it's usually you. I don't like this gimmick, and I will not be watching this video.
I'm sorry. Apologize about that, man.
I love you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Look, I don't mean to be crass. I don't mean to be rude. The bottom line is, of course, biologically, the human animal, as do all other animals, they only exist in two binary forms.
Genders, right?
Yes.
Okay, so there are two genders then. That's what my stance is.
You really backed me into a corner, my friend. This is more arguing that we've reached a place mentally where we're expanding ourselves to more schools of thought that might result in interesting and new philosophies to move us forward and maybe have us be more harmonious with one another.
Sure, that's fair. Like that's something where I will say those are thoughts, right? You say those are thoughts, and anyone can have thoughts and feel like how they ever want, right? But that's what they are. They remain to be thoughts.
Yeah.
There's a difference between having a thought about something and feeling a certain way and actually biologically, physically being that thing.
Yeah.
And so that's where you get into kind of a gray area, right? It's like what actually is something that I physically can be, what versus what can I feel like I am. Well, and what we're trying to say here is that there are two physical genders. There are two things that you can be. When you're born, you're either XX or XY chromosome, right? You're not going to be XY and then Z, za, zing or whatever you can be, right?
Z, za, zing.
So, the chromosomes, those are the two things that you are, and that is fact.
I
whatever
get that.
you feel like, no one's saying that you can't feel like whatever you want to be, right? Like, yeah. I'm not 21 years old, and I might want to grab a beer every now and then, but I can't identify as 21, can I? Even though that's what I feel like.
I feel like the part of the human experience is having things in your head that you create and manifest into real life. So if you want to manifest your own identity or your own way of being perceived or perceiving yourself, I think you should be able to do that without people saying that it's not natural or biologically against.
So I have a question for you. So do you believe, like, since I'm not 21, if I want to go grab a beer down at the bar, can I say I feel like I'm 21 so I can go down to the bar?
No, but you can buy a fake ID, and for all intents and purposes, you are 21.
But that's not true. First of all, that's a crime. Second of all...
Yes, it is a crime.
Second of all, that doesn't change the fact that my cells aren't 21 years old, right? That my psyche isn't 21 years old. It's still not real, is my point. So I can do all these things to make myself feel like I'm something that I'm not. And sure, maybe I can feel that way, right? But at the same...
Do you see what I mean about the argument that we're having is real versus not real,
Correct.
Exists versus doesn't exist?
Yes.
But the argument of it's not real might stunt people's ability or openness to try and socialize with these groups or try to maybe explore their identity a little further.
Can I pause this here for a second? Do you mind, is that
ahead,
okay? Just because I know you have a time limit.
Yeah.
So this is kind of something that we run into a lot. I don't know who's watching who feels like this has sort of gotten off into the weeds a little bit. I think that you're both agreeing on a lot more than you realize. It seems to me.
Yeah, I think we've agreed from the beginning.
Well, it seems to me that if I'm not mistaken, you agree. You're saying that biological sex and gender are different from each other, correct?
I don't think you can. Yeah, they're different.
Sounds to me like you're saying that. And it sounds to me like you're saying, prove it.
Well, I'm saying prove it, and you can't biologically change your gender.
Well, yeah, but I think, and that is why it's very hard for us to get permits. So I think this is what's really important. This is one thing too. You're very logical, and I appreciate how articulate you are. But I think there can be a faster path to kind of get into the point here. Okay.
Sure, so yeah.
Why do you believe, because you were talking about not wanting to marginalize people and how productive it can be for these people to engage with their communities. Mm-hmm. I think you would agree with that people should have community. We can all agree community is a good thing, we care about people. But since you stated in the affirmative that biological sex and gender are different, what is that based on? And I think that's where you guys are missing each other a little bit. What is that based on?
It's based on science, and I'm more arguing for sociology, I would guess.
Okay. So biological sex and gender is based on science. Now, would you like to follow up with this?
Sure. So if we're talking about gender being based on science, when you are born, there are two chromosomes that define what gender you are, XX versus XY. That has nothing to do with the psychological how I feel in my brain. You cannot magically change your gender or your sex just based on the inherent cells and DNA that makes up your body. That is science.
And the common argument, and the one that I was kind of flipping around, is that gender and sex have kind of become separate in terms of their meaning as people have gone on. It's been reclaimed almost by a group of people. What?
For this installment, we'll ignore that guy because you can see the entire extended altercation with said knob by joining Mug Club at louderwithcrowder.com/mugclub. Not only do you get exclusive daily and extended content, but due to the demonetization of videos like these, it's the only way to ensure that this content continues. louderwithcrowder.com/mugclub. Get yourself a student discount while you're there. This is the problem, is this is the kind of thing that often this is what people want in traditional media, is someone yelling out an insult and people reacting. We just had 15 to 20 minutes of two people having a conversation
conversation. You're the outlier. You're the jerk. Okay.
Yeah!
All right, we have to wrap this up, and then I'd like to sit down with Sam.
So, in conclusion, I believe that we should separate the word gender from the term biological sex because it's been claimed by people who want to use it in a different way, a more social way, in order to feel more comfortable with themselves.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Parker. I'd like to sit with you, Sam, to talk about this.
Yep.
Thank you, Parker, very much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Parker. I thought these students did pretty well, and I wanted to see exactly what Sam thought, along with offering some pointers of my own. Keep in mind, the whole purpose behind Change My Mind and these student editions in particular is to help the students and you watching learn how to rationalize your own positions and engage in productive conversations. You know, things your professors are supposed to do.
And one thing I'd like to kind of clarify here, too, something that we've discussed quite a bit. You know, this isn't a debate. And what I want to encourage, how many people here have really learned the Socratic method in college?
In high school, I did.
In high school? Show of hands, who here has actually been taught the Socratic method in college?
Doesn't help if you're a biologist.
How many people here have been taught the Socratic method in college or in university? Okay, seems like few people. The point of the Socratic method is not to debate, not to score points, but to actually examine your own argument and see if it comes to a logical conclusion. Quick question, how many people here can tell me what would constitute a bad argument?
Invalid points.
There's a couple points. Ad hominem, you know, there's a couple rules I think that
Sure.
lay out.
Well, what you're presenting, so I heard ad hominem, appeal to authority. These are things we call logical fallacies. But before we get to that, and I do want to get to that in a second, a bad argument is an argument with a false premise or a conclusion that doesn't necessarily correlate to its premise, a conclusion that does not prove its premise. That's what constitutes a bad argument. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind anytime you talk with professors, anytime you talk with other students, because as long as you keep that in mind, examining, okay, is what they're presenting a good argument or a bad argument? Is the premise true? Do we agree on terminology? Do we agree on the data presented? Does the conclusion directly correlate, and is it caused by what's been presented in this premise? And examine your own arguments that same way. It necessitates a more productive dialogue. Now, I'd like to kind of go back through this here with Parker.
Yep.
So, at one point he said, no, I don't believe, you said there are two genders, and he disagreed with you, right? And you went down kind of asking him some questions. Here's, I think, something that's pretty effective when you're just asking a basic question in the outset. So you can play Parker for a second. I believe there are only two genders.
I believe there are only, I'm Parker, right? So yes. I do not believe there are only two genders. Changed my mind.
Okay.
It's not true, but.
So I think this is important right here. Before you go on, you kind of guys missed each other. What might be more productive when you start that conversation is he says, well, I don't believe, you've stated in the affirmative you believe there are two genders.
Correct, yeah.
He said, well, I believe there are more. But you let him go on, let him go down a rabbit trail without defining it. So I would just say, okay, how many are there? And no one ever answers that question. So if someone is going to make a statement, again, we go back to sort of the idea of logical fallacies, burden of proof. Someone can't place the burden of proof back on you if you say, I believe there are two genders, and this is backed by centuries of biological medicine science, and they say, well, I believe there are more, without stating in the affirmative with the same certainty how many there are.
Well, isn't his premise that sex and gender are like separable?
That's what he moves on to, sure. But it doesn't change the fact that one would need to answer how many genders are there. So it's not really fair if you say there are two and you're arguing with someone who says, well, there are more, you've put a number on it, right? Yeah. He hasn't. And looking back, you think maybe that would have helped you guys kind of see where you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think so. I think it would have gotten to the point a lot faster. I think that, at least in this particular issue, it's very easy to kind of you have the burden of proof, or they have the burden of proof. You're the one with the solidified fact. And I think so. I think that if you, a lot of these people, if you can just, they have the burden of proof because they're the ones making these grand assertions. And so the minute that you ask them to prove it, either they can or they cannot, and that's how the argument plays out.
So how would you say this would you say this exercise benefited you?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's good, and I think for especially at a campus like UT, which is so politically divisive and very violent, especially against the conservative population, I think it's good to, at the very least, show some exposure for our arguments and the logic behind them.
I appreciate that you did it so civilly and productively. I know you got a time limit.
Steven, I appreciate it.
Sam, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the time, Sam. Now it's time for two other game students. Colton and Gilbert, step right up.
So you are obviously stating your position in the affirmative.
Yes.
And it's your goal to change his mind. All right. Understand? Yeah. Okay, so Colton, go ahead, state your position in the affirmative.
I would say that there are only two genders in the world based on scientific reasoning, genetics in particular. I believe that gender being not connected to biological reasoning would have to do with psychological differences.
Okay. Can you speak a little louder? Just going forward. Sorry. Okay. And you're welcoming someone to change your mind.
Yes.
All right, Gilbert, your floor, sir.
All right. Once again, my name's Gilbert. I believe that there are more than two genders. And first of all, I'd like to agree with you. I'm going to start with an agreement that psychologically, there's a difference between gender and sex. I believe we can agree that you're either born with a penis or you're born with a vagina, right?
Yeah, of course.
And that is your sex. Now, to me, and to a lot of people, I believe, gender is what you define yourself in society. Like, is not connected to what you have in your pants. It's connected to how you present yourself to the world.
See, that's where I think the argument first started like 10 or 15 years ago, right? Is that gender and sex, suddenly their definition switched from being the same thing to being sex and gender are different things. And I think my opinion would be that those two definitions shouldn't have been separated in the first place, where your opinion's different.
Yeah. So gender and sex have been separate things for more than just 15 years. There are several Native American tribes where your gender was not associated with your sex. The idea, at least in Western culture, is fairly new when it's contrasted with the Christian ideology of two genders, man and woman, all that.
Yeah, which I think that's the predominant thought process and moral standing on that conclusion is Greco-Roman scientific reasoning is the basis for Western society. So that's where I would build that argument off of.
I wouldn't call it scientific because, like I said, it's what you believe. It's purely societal,
so
the definition of gender.
How would the scientific reasoning differ a gender from another other than psychological? Like, what physical evidence could there be?
There doesn't. When it comes to gender, the physical evidence is how people present themselves. We don't need to have labels because, like you asked, that how many genders there are, we don't need to define that. There can be an infinite number of genders. It's all about what you define. We don't need to say there are 2, there are 5, there are 8. That's unnecessary. It's how you present yourself. There's more than just masculine and feminine. It's a spectrum of how you present yourself.
Well, for instance, would a tom girl still be a girl then? Or is she a boy?
If she believes she's a girl, she's a girl. She can...
But does that contrast with the fact that she has a vagina and 2 X chromosomes?
Not necessarily. We're conflating the idea of masculinity and femininity with what you have in your pants, which isn't necessary. You can present yourself any way you want. I could go around wearing a dress if that's what I particularly wanted to do.
But are you still a boy then? Because you have a penis, I would assume.
Sexually, like scientifically, I still have a penis. That makes me a male, sex.
Yes.
The gender doesn't need to have a label on it.
Okay, so then we can agree that if you have, say, an X and a Y and you have a penis, you're a male no matter what. But you could identify as something else.
Yes. You can identify as whatever you want to identify with.
Yeah.
Like, nobody needs to conform to anything that anybody else wants them to conform to.
Can I pause for a second?
Of course.
So since your job here is to change his mind, what I've heard you say is that gender is separate from sex.
Yes.
What I've heard you present is scientific arguments, and you use Greco-Roman reasoning as basically the basis for Western society and culture, which would tell me that you believe that's a value.
Yes.
That you value Western society.
Yes.
Okay. You're telling him that there are non-Western societies that may not share those values, and saying that you can identify or present yourself as any gender that you would like.
Yes.
Doesn't seem to me like that's going to convince him of anything or change his mind. So let me do this. Let's present your kind of closing arguments on this topic. If you wanted him to see one particular facet of your point of view, what do you think would be the most convincing argument you could make to someone who believes there are only 2 genders?
That gender and sex are not the same thing. that's the basis of my argument and a lot of arguments, and I hope that's what other people will see, that we don't have to assign societal roles to what you have in your pants.
Okay. And then Colton, what would be your closing argument or statement there?
Well, I'd like to point out, for example, like I believe it's the CEO of Ford Industries is a woman. I don't think there's any particular. I think we've come far enough in a society that we can let anybody do any societal role, no matter what's in their pants. It doesn't matter on what their gender identity is. And in fact, that would somewhat be sexism if you think about it. If you had to be a woman, your gender had to be a woman to do some societal role, that would be against reasoning.
Good you guys feel like this was a good conversation? Yeah, good.
Thanks, Colton and Gilbert. Now, it's almost as though these two different conversations mirrored each other exactly in execution. Let me know if you've spotted the trend yourself. Comment below. Okay, so we initially planned this outing to be exclusively between students, but the students themselves voted.
Who would like to see the next one be, again, with two students conversing? Okay, who would like the next one to be me sitting down with somebody?
And I decided to have one more traditional sit-down on the topic of gender with UT's Lucas.
What was your name, sir?
I'm Lucas.
Lucas?
Pleasure.
Nice to meet you, Lucas. Could you mind scooching in a little bit?
Yeah.
All right. So, Lucas, I believe that there are only two genders. We've been talking about this all day. That one's pretty straightforward. Changed my mind.
Yeah. All right, so I think first and foremost, the largest question we've been asking today, do you think that sex and gender are two separate things?
No.
No, okay. So, in my view, I see sex is the biological factors that differentiate men and women. On the other side, gender is more the social and cultural aspects and factors that contribute to how people behave as male or female. Okay. And that's built up through how parents and other important individuals in our lives from childhood build up and influence our behavior. So I think, especially in today's day and age, gender is more not just biological factors that define who we are. Mm-hmm. It's something that's changing, and it's how we identify someone as either male or female.
And on what is that based? The idea that gender and sex are separate. Where does that come from?
Sociology. It's one of the main topics. It's one of the main, I guess you could say, fields of research, how they identify the difference between gender and sex, basically. So I'd say sociology mainly. It's also some psychology, but...
Okay, sociology.
Yes.
How long would you say that's been the case?
Personally, in my view, I think it's been a constant case, but I think especially now, it's a topic that's gaining a lot more
Where does it stem from in Western society, I guess is my question.
Stem from...
Okay, so let me... before we get there, let me present... biological sex and gender have been inextricably intertwined for pretty much the entirety of Western civilization.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when I ask you what is this based on, you just presented an argument that gender and sex are different. Now, I want to make sure that I understand. You said that's based on sociology.
Yes.
Yes. Not based on science or medicine. My point of view is based on science and medicine.
Right.
And the point of view that you're presenting, the reason I ask you is it's very important. This is a very new idea. So the idea that gender, or they're transgender, the idea that gender should be separated from sex, that came with Simone de Beauvoir in the 1940s. This doesn't come from science. This comes from postmodernist existentialism. And even then, it was presented in the idea of a binary, that a male can have more female qualities or a female can have more male qualities, but it's a societal construct. You go all the way through the John Money study. You really don't get to Judith Butler until the 1980s or 1990s, who had this idea that gender was based on a spectrum. Again, none of this is based in science. None of this is based in medical data
and I
or
agree,
history.
It's definitely a much newer idea and topic. But
right.
I think also, though, when it comes to, what was I going to say? Gender on that topic, I think you have to consider, though, a lot more people how it's bringing to attention. So how would you identify? So someone who was born intersex, someone who was born with the genitalia of both men and women, how would you identify their gender?
Well, first off, there are a couple of things there, if I may address it. A lot of intersex people are born masculine or feminine, male or female, with, for example, some extra breast tissue, or a woman might have an enlarged clitoris. They're less than 0.01% of population Earth, intersex. And by the way, not all those people consider themselves transgender, LGBTQA.
So you'd say
a lot
it's
of them
just
don't.
a mutation?
Well, I would say it's an anomaly. It's a medical anomaly. Okay. For example, what do we teach children? How many fingers or toes do people have?
We teach them 5 and 10 on each.
Yeah, 5 and 10. That's okay. I'm not going to try and catch it. 5 or 10. Why don't we teach them 20?
Because like you said, the majority of us,
Right.
we have the same. Yeah.
How many hearts do people have?
We all have one.
Okay, we all have one. Good. So we agree on that. So if we can put this extreme example off to the side for a second, that's not how we define male and female according to biology.
At the same time, that's the same argument as saying, so how old are you?
I'm 32.
So you can't identify as saying I identify as 45. Age is just not something that's changing in society. It's the same argument in saying, so maybe 100 years from now, somebody might argue that I can identify as 50. But today's day and age, gender...
People are already arguing that.
Exactly, but that's not something that we're already recognizing in society as something on a basis for argument
Why
like
not?
this. Because we just haven't reached that point in society.
But you think we will?
I do think that we will. And
so we think transageism is a valid
No, I don't. I definitely do not agree with that on that basis. Because for me, when we start learning about certain things in classes, like gender, sex, I think it's a viable issue in which we can identify. And people who identify...
Well, why? I guess my question here is I was going to ask, if you're going to uproot all of modern Western civilization, right? Male, female roles, biology, sex.
Right.
Gender was not removed from sex until very recently. We both agree on that.
Definitely,
it used to be really a grammatical term.
Yeah.
Still is in a lot of the Romance languages. What is the net benefit to completely removing gender from sex? Why do that?
I definitely don't think there's a net benefit to completely removing them. I just think we need to recognize that there is, the way we identify it and interpret it, I think that there is cause for understanding the difference therein, and that there are certain people who, and in society, many people actually, who would like to have that recognized. And I do think that there is some evidence on a scientific basis, or as well as sociological studies, that does give cause for understanding this and interpreting it.
How so?
Well, in society, with the people that identify as different genders, right? And it's on one side, it's a manner of being able to consider like acceptance in society, feeling comfortable with oneself. But at the same time, we can still identify them as how you want to identify, but also letting them to identify themselves in the way that they would like to be.
So you're saying it would be okay if someone a male who identifies as female, you wouldn't have a problem with someone like me misgendering them using masculine pronouns?
No. In classes, we recognize this oftentimes. Our TAs will sometimes ask us, everyone has to go around, identify your pronouns, and I think that oftentimes that's unnecessary.
Why?
Because we all recognize, we all want to be respectful, right?
Sure.
I think in most cases people aren't trying to intentionally offend.
But why
other
isn't it
students.
necessary? Why didn't you ask me my pronouns before you sat down?
Because especially for a discussion like this, it's unnecessary.
Why?
There's an unnecessary, because for you especially, I think we can interpret, is that an important thing for you to identify your pronouns?
Sure.
Okay. So
Let's say I do, but you made a judgment that it might not be important to me.
Right.
Why?
Well, because in most cases, the people that do genuinely care a great deal about it, that is something that they will present to you up front in the beginning. And that was something that...
Well, you just said you went around in a classroom and asked people their preferred pronouns. Why didn't you do it with me? What did you assume I am?
I assume you're male, yes.
Why?
That's an assumption based on the fact, from what I know of you already.
Okay.
So I have pre-knowledge of that. But in my example, what I was stating is my TA, they said, they instructed us to go around and go. So basically, it's just the direction of the TA. They wanted us to all identify our pronouns.
Okay.
So it's situation.
I'm asking you, for example, it's a very new concept.
Definitely.
You weren't necessarily super familiar as to where it came from. Hopefully, maybe that's helped. Look, I would encourage you to read Simone de Beauvoir and Judith Butler quite a bit, and read up on the twin study by John Money. But I do think it's important if you're going to say, okay, you've learned this from your sociology professors. Sure. In this scenario, that's kind of an appeal to authority fallacy a little bit, where you're saying, well, my professors say this. So I usually don't like appealing to authority. But in this case, I will. Every doctor in the history of ever, right? Every biologist in the history of ever. Kinesiologists would also have to look at the difference in the male and female bodies. So if we're going to appeal to authority, I certainly would appeal to science and observable medical data. I ask you what the net benefit is. And you said there isn't necessarily one. Well, I think there's a huge net cost. There's a huge net cost if you say, well, there aren't only two genders. Now there's a burden of proof on you. How many genders are there?
As I said, I believe that there are 3 genders.
Okay.
I think there are male, female, and intersex. I don't think that we can consider just intersex as a mutation. I don't think that's fair, and especially in our modern society, I think it's something that we should consider. But I can put a number on it.
So 3.
Something to
so you wouldn't consider
it.
Transgender a gender? You wouldn't consider non-binary a gender?
No, I don't think there's evidence yet enough to support that.
Okay, so you really just believe that there's a third gender for people who are born intersex.
Exactly, yeah.
Which I think actually we would
fair,
both agree.
yeah.
Yeah, medically, but that's a bit different from what your sociology professors would be professing.
Yeah, I think it's actually the textbook. Yeah. But
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How many genders do they say there are?
They don't put a number on it, and that's why I don't think there's evidence enough for it yet. So once you can put a number and quantify these things, I think you can start doing a great deal more research and actually get behind it.
Okay.
Once they have something you can get behind specifically.
So how would you identify someone who, let's say, says that they are trans, male to female trans?
I mean, what do you mean though? Internally, or how would I present myself to them? Because it's different, right?
Yeah, I'm not saying you would insult them,
Yeah.
but do you see that person as a female, or do you see that person as a male?
In my view, I see them how they want to be interpreted. Whether or not I actually recognize them or internalize them as being male or female, that's different. But I will always make an effort to internalize and present them how they want to be seen. So if someone who is, say, a transgender female presents themselves to me as a female, I will internalize that as they were female. I may also think and consciously think about them as.
But you don't believe that those should be recognized
not
legally?
Necessarily. No, not legally. No.
No. Okay. So on a driver's license, it would still say male or female.
Yes.
Okay. Well, there you go. We agree on most everything as far as the
legally. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate it. It was very productive. Thank you, sir. Well, there you have it. 2 full, productive conversations between students, and one between a student and myself. Let me know what you think of the format, what you'd like to see next, and as always, be prepared to rationalize your own position. See you next time. Okay, if you like this video, you watch videos on YouTube. If I were Jimmy Kimmel, if I were Stephen Colbert, or Trevor Noah, I would tell you to subscribe. But I have no corporate overlords who demand that I do this demeaning promo. I do the demeaning promo because I choose to. Subscribe or hit the notification bell because I need you. I need you. Please do it.